Chapter 428, The Inn Incident. The journey back upstairs was less awkward. Eric and Adonis discussed what the adventurers spoke up, taking turns to examine what was true, false, or exaggerated in the entire conversation. Adonis personally didn't care too much for that, as he told Eric not to take the whole thing too seriously. They ended up talking to a few adventurers and made some connections while having fun. That was all that mattered. Eric couldn't help but agree with Adonis. They finally returned to the room, and they found all the students on the bed, all of them unable to sleep. They were already dressed casually and had undone their disguise. Many would question the intelligence behind such a move, considering they could be spied upon when inside the room. However, there was no sign of image capturing magic or technology around. Adventurers enjoyed their privacy and freedom, and since they did some pretty private things in the inns they stayed at, establishment owners knew better than to install something that would intrude on their private business. Such magic was rare too, and incredibly expensive. "You're all still awake? What's the matter?" Adonis looked around to observe the faces of his classmates. "You all look gloomy." It was no surprise that they were this way, but Alicia decided to explain, all while staying close to her pet rabbit, Snow. "Well, we have a lot on our minds, you know. For one, they had to pass the adventurer test the next day if they wanted to be recognized as such. Despite being assured that it wouldn't be a big deal, most of the students couldn't help but look forward to it. However, the major thing that held people awake was quite obvious. "Seems weird that we've been left here all alone without adult supervision," Alicia said with a slight smile. It felt like going on a field trip without the school staff, or like traveling abroad without knowing anyone at all upon arrival. Most of the students still had the jitters that accompanied such experiences. There was no way sleep could come. "Well, I understand how overwhelming this entire situation is." Adonis walked into the closet, coming back out in the blink of an eye in a casual outfit. No one could explain how he was able to change so quickly, so they just pretended not to have seen anything. "But we'll be fine. We have each other, and we're plenty strong and mature now." Adonis gave his signature charismatic smile and beamed brightly. "I'm sure we can handle anything that comes our way." Most of the students beamed at this, except maybe Belle, who was still not over the fact that Relix treated her so coldly. "Hey. Since this is the first time we're in a room together, why don't we play a game?" Justin jumped from his bed and made the suggestion. Many people needed to relieve the tension, so they didn't react adversely to the idea. "Truth or dare? What do you say, everyone?" The blushing look on Justin's face showed he had some pretty nasty intentions with this suggestion, but it was honestly a fun game that they all considered playing it. Of course, they had to defer to their leader to see what he thought of the idea. Adonis chuckled as he stepped forward. He gave a thumbs up and raised his eyebrow a few times in a semi-naughty manner. "Count me in." Many expected Adonis to be the mature guy in the group, the closest thing to an adult, but even he wasn't immune to fun. He wasn't a wet blanket, and honestly that added to his charm. "All right." Justin beamed, being the most excited out of everyone. "Gather around, everyone. Let's get this party started." It was a fun night while it lasted, but eventually everyone went to bed. Well, almost everyone. Adonis was still awake, his eyes stuck facing the ceiling in the room as he struggled to think. Amidst the loud snores that Billy made and the Sir Relix that Belle whispered while she dreamt, it would have been a difficult, nigh impossible task for most. But Adonis was different. He zoned his mind away from all the distractions and focused on the voice that came from his own mind. "Jet and Lux, huh?" He had certainly heard of those names before, but not in this life. It was in the original timeline. They were the ones responsible for the Adventurers City massacre. Adonis thought trailed. There was no conclusive evidence on that, but they were the most likely suspects based on all the events that aligned up until the massacre. Back then, the Dead Zone, a haven for monsters, began to show strange activity, and it unleashed an impossible horde of monsters on the City of Adventures. The result? The massacre ended up wiping out nearly 90% of the adventurers in the city, leaving only the ones who were either strong enough to survive, or cowardly enough to run. By the time Adonis and his classmates were dispatched to help the city, it was already too late. The place was in ruins, an empty shell of what it once was. It was a bloody sight. I still remember it so vividly. The worst part about the incident was that the Adventurers City had encountered yet another tragedy before this massacre. The Grand Calamity Class Dungeon. The conquest ended in failure, and a lot of the adventurers who went in ended up losing their lives. Among those who didn't, had to retire from adventuring due to too much trauma or irreversible damage caused by miasma poisoning. That in itself was horrible. Of course, Adonis hoped to change that horrid future, which was why he and his classmates were here in the first place. People will still die. I can't help that. Adonis sighed. He wished there was a better way to go about the situation, but his limited experience couldn't afford him to make any radical changes. Still, I'll save as many people as I can. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Chapter 429, Memories of the Massacre. The Adventurers City Massacre. Everyone called it the work of absolute evil due to how gruesome the event was. It all started with the Dead Zone, which was consistently regulated, displaying abnormal signs. 1 or 2 monsters would escape from the forest and attempt attacking the city. This happened within the interval of days, so while it was worrisome, it wasn't particularly a threat worth taking very seriously. Every time the monsters tried to assault the city, they were killed. Usually, there would be no casualty. However, in the worst case, a few people would be injured. Still, no one expected it to lead to a tragedy, especially since it was only a few months after the Grand Calamity Class Dungeon incident, and people were still healing. There were plans to launch a full sweep on the Dead Zone at the end of the year, but that was still months away. They still had time. Or so they thought. No one expected the carnage that came next, the huge influx of monsters that defied human explanation. The city was swarming with C-tier monsters. Several B-tier monsters also made their appearance, and finally, the A-tier monstrosities showed up as well. They surrounded the city, exhibiting overtly intelligent behavior that monsters weren't known for. Everyone was trapped, almost as if the entire city was in a birdcage. There was no escape. The only reason there were survivors was because the Otherworlders showed up when they did. This was their debut mission, and they were welcome with the horrid sight of carnage, a sight they would eventually get used to once they reached the front lines. The Otherworlders were able to defeat the monsters after a ton of effort, and while the city suffered a great loss that day, it wasn't completely wiped out. And then, once the dust settled, the same question echoed in everyone's mind. Who could have done this? The answer was unanimous. Everyone chose the most likely suspects, 2 strange adventurers who arrived in the city about a day after the first attack from the Dead Zone. They registered as adventurers and easily passed the heroic rank test. They also displayed a lot of suspicious activities, especially in relation to the Dead Zone. No one knew who they really were, and since their arrival coincided with the destruction of the city, blaming them was the only natural conclusion. What cemented the case was the fact that, after the massacre, they completely vanished. No one found their corpse, which meant they were still alive somewhere. Without a doubt, they were the ones involved in that incident. But why? Why would anyone do such a wicked thing to their fellow man? Well, what if they weren't human, to begin with? It was only until later that Adonis and his allies discovered the existence of something that they never thought was possible. Dragon spies. After this discovery, years after the massacre incident, the actions of Jet and Lux suddenly made sense. They were both dragon spies. That would explain their absurd strength, their malevolent decisions, and the fact that they couldn't be found after causing such tragedy. And now, they're here. Adonis thought to himself, his deep frown impossible to hide. The two despicable vermin that ruined so many lives had come to wreak havoc, once again. Merely thinking about it caused heat to rise in Adonis' chest. Still, something wasn't right. They're early. Too early. The Grand Calamity Dungeon conquest hadn't even started yet, so what we're doing in the city so early? Damn it. Is this the dragonfly effect again? Adonis thought to himself. I thought, at the very least, the adventurer's city wouldn't be affected by anything yet. It seemed his hopes had been dashed before he even realized it. Despite all the discrepancies, however, core facts remain the same. The people from the previous timeline were the same in this timeline. Adam was the mastermind, right? And for the most part my classmates are how I remember them. Of course, there were a few exceptions to the rule. One of them was with Billy being a far more depraved person than he appeared, even in the past. Then there's Ray, who's considerably a lot weaker than he was back then. Thankfully, Ray had been making a lot of improvements and that was very exciting to see. If things went well, it was indeed possible for him to attain his prime. I hope that happens. After all, it's my fault that he isn't at that point now. For Adonis to rise as a hero, most people had to take the back seat in popularity. As such, it was likely that Ray's karma points were somehow lower due to his interference. I'm a bit too anxious to ask him, but wasn't his karma point around 60 in the past? It must have really gone down if he ended up with the cards he ended up being dealt with at the start. In any case, Adonis took his mind off Ray and focused on the primary issue at hand. Jet and Lux. How do I deal with them? A bead of sweat fell from his face. He didn't know how strong they were, so if he charged in recklessly, there was a chance that he could end up stirring the hornet's nest. I've grown to the point where I'm confident in my ability to handle any dragon commander by myself. His thoughts trailed. Unfortunately, if a dragon general or dragon lord showed up, things would get astronomically more difficult. Depending on compatibility, I could end up trading a few blows with a dragon general. Even if victory is not guaranteed. However, Adonis knew. When it came to a dragon lord, it was impossible for him to win. Not with how he currently was. If my opponents are dragon generals who are stronger than I am, then it'll be overkill for me to fight too. He never saw Jet and Lux in the past, so he couldn't have even seen them in action. As such, Adonis was left in the dark once again. What should I do? Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Chapter 430, Adventurer Registration. Adonis slept in a very confused state that night. He still had no idea what he could do to prevent whatever catastrophe that Jet and Lux planned on causing, but he certainly had no intention of leaving them be. In the worst case, he would attempt to expose them for who they were in secret, and then catch them off guard by launching a surprise attack with his classmates. I'm still not sure how it'll go, but the safest option would be to call Relix, but Adonis had no way to contact him. I'm sure Sir Relix is as strong as a dragon general. No, definitely stronger. Adonis narrowed his eyes as he felt his brows crease. He didn't see Relix winning against a dragon lord, but he also didn't expect a dragon lord to disguise themselves as adventurers. It was even a big stretch to say that they were dragon generals, but that still existed in the realm of possibility. In any case, I can't hesitate on this matter. Adonis decided to himself in resolve. After all, even if he was unsure of most of the details about the duo, he was guaranteed one thing. They are the enemy. The group decided to take turns going to the Adventurers Guild in an attempt not to be seen as a party by adventurers. Their goal was to be recruited into separate parties, so it would be problematic if the adventurers already associated everyone as a unit. As such, each individual had to proceed to the guild, take their adventurer's test, and come back out. It was that simple. That's why I chose the inn closest to the guild. Adonis smiled to himself. In the previous timeline, after the massacre, he and his friends remained in the city for a few weeks. It was then that Adonis was able to learn most of what he knew about adventurers and adventuring. It's also why the plan is this way. Each student, with Adonis as the exception, would opt to take tests within the 3 to 5 star range, with Adonis taking the 6-star test. Of course, just based on their level and capabilities, Adonis had no doubt that every single one of his classmates had long surpassed the criteria for becoming a heroic rank adventurer. However, they weren't here to show off. If we have too big of a rank, it would cause more unnecessary chaos in the city. Plus, we probably won't get any offers to join a party since adventurers would distance themselves from us. That would completely defeat the goal. The only reason I'm taking a 6-star test is so I can pull my weight by joining the strongest party. Everyone else could join any random party they liked. As Adonis was engrossed in thought, classmate after the other trailed inside or proceeded outside the room. They all did this after breakfast, of course, so it wasn't particularly a chore. Once they were all done, it was finally his turn. All right. Let's get this over with. Adonis smiled as he proceeded out of the room and walked quickly down the path that led to the biggest building in the city. It didn't take long before he arrived at his destination. Creak. As he opened the door and allowed the stifling air of the reception to wash over him, he felt a bit of nostalgia. He glanced to his far left and noticed the big board, with quite a few adventurers already standing there and looking at the quests presented there. Nothing has changed, I see. He allowed his nostalgia to guide him to the desk of a particularly fair woman. The tag on her chest read Levia. That's strange. I don't see Burke. Adonis quite remembered the lady that occupied this spot from his past life. She was quite popular among the adventurers, considering how she had been working in the same position for over 10 years. Sorry, do you know where Miss Burke went? Adonis asked in the most polite tone he could muster at the fair lady. She gave him a smile and slightly shook her head. Oh, she got promoted yesterday. She's pretty much our boss now. I see. Adonis said with a slight laugh. Thank you FO. I envy her, though. Don't tell anyone I told you this, but I think the reason she was able to shoot up the ranks so quickly was due to the last customers she attended to. Adonis didn't really want to continue the conversation, but he was too nice to shut the lady down, especially when she leaned forward and whispered words to him as if they were somehow conspirators. Who were these last customers? He asked half-heartedly, not expecting anything special. The next words that he heard instantly caused his eyes to widen. Jet and Lux, the new 6-star adventurers who took the city by storm. Over the course of one night, their names had become so widespread that they pretty much achieved celebrity status in such a short span of time. If only they had come to my desk that day. Livia mumbled. She was even getting lots of complaints before being promoted. Adonis filtered out all the unnecessary words that were bouncing around his ears, focusing on the crucial information he had just heard. She got promoted thanks to them. That's ridiculous. The guild doesn't function that way. The more likely reason was due to being qualified for a much higher position, having worked there for over 10 years. Though Adonis still suspected that her involvement with the two somehow prompted her to take the extra step. She never took any promotion back then. Did they make her do it? Adonis wondered. Perhaps they wanted someone in a higher position of power so they could have access to more information. No. Dragons don't work that way. They didn't trust humans that much, and they certainly wouldn't go after someone as ordinary as Burke. Her position wasn't even that important. I guess there's only one way to find out. He inhaled deeply, finally resolving to silence the girl that kept rambling in front of him. Can I meet with her? Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Chapter 431, Adventurer Registration. Hello, young man. Burke was seated behind a more distinguished desk, her chair also looking more comfortable than the one she used to occupy a few days ago. She had her own office on the first floor, and her job was a more specialized version of the receptionist's duties. High-profile cases went to her, and she approved. She also dealt with top-class adventurers who couldn't bother standing in front of an ordinary reception. Based on her 10-year experience, it was something she could do pretty easily, and she did her job flawlessly well. She enjoyed it too. Burke had her own space, and since she wasn't as busy as before, she had more than enough time to think. Hello. May I have a seat? Please do. Burke smiled, her eyes gleaming behind her glasses as she saw the handsome blonde walk towards her. He had a serious look on his good-looking face, and Burke couldn't help but fawn over all of his manly features. Jet was a lot more good-looking, just going off her memory of him, but this blonde was incredible in his own right. My name is Sabas. I'm to take the heroic rank test, so I was told to meet you to sort out my details. Oh? This is quite the season. Burke chuckled in pleasant surprise as she opened her drawer to bring out a form. Have you gone through initial registration already? Not yet. The person attending to me said I can do everything here. Yeah. I suppose. Burke brought out a few more papers and placed them on her desk. Fill these. She said with a broad smile plastered on her face while keeping her gaze on him. Not long after, the Sabas fellow obeyed and gradually did so. One look at his pristine handwriting told her that he was a distinguished fellow. She didn't realize it when she licked her lips. So. A heroic rank adventurer, huh? Burke said with a relaxed grin. Any reason why you want to go so far so quickly? Well, I am not the only one who has done this, right? As Sabas asked, she slowly shook her head. But only one man has been able to succeed on his first ever test. Well. I look up to that man. Sabas' determined face and dreamy smile caused Burke's heart to skip a beat. She found herself grinning a little stupidly as she nodded. That's not a bad thing. Jet is a pretty admirable man. After all, if it wasn't for the epiphany she received after her encounter with him, she wouldn't have had the courage to seek out more. The reason she remained as a base receptionist was to meet as many men as possible in her line of work. However, after realizing that she was just wasting her time, and the man she met weren't the ones she desired, neither were they the ones who desired her, she chose to change. I don't meet as many people in this position, but that's a good thing. She could filter out all the useless men from her life, hence making more time for the men who were truly decent candidates like the one in front of her. And because she now had a position of authority, they wouldn't be able to look down on her. Indeed. I heard you were the one who filled out his form. Also, Lady Luxusava said with a nod. Yeah. It was a memorable last moment in my previous workstation. If you don't mind, while I fill this form, could you tell me more about Sir Jet? He asked. The man really had a brilliant gleam in his beautiful eyes. How could she refuse him when he spoke to her like that? Well, what do you want to know? A broader smile appeared on her face. Besides, since you want to take the heroic rank test, you plan on passing, right? Of course. Then wouldn't it be better to ask him yourself, once you become a heroic rank adventurer? Sabas looked a bit shy once she mentioned that, so she instantly knew what was going on. You want to know more about your hero before meeting him, huh? What an adorable man. He was just her type. Well, where to start? Burke grinned, interlocking both fingers as she parted her lips. Jet is. A lot of irrelevant information was added to the mix, but Adonis pretty much got the gist of things. This woman doesn't really know anything. It seemed like he had wasted most of his time learning things that were unnecessary, or irrelevant in his investigation of the two evils that threatened the city. The only useful thing I got was their appearance, but I could have gotten it from anywhere. The girl seemed pretty identical, for the most part, but the man was completely different from the descriptions of Jet from his past life. He has a pale skin and handsome face this time. In the past he had a horrible scar on his face, with a menacing aura. Their attires were also different, and this applied to Lux as well. He's dressed as a gentleman now, but he was more like a dark mage back then. As for the girl, while her appearance and attire's design was mostly the same, she was dressed in all black as well. Same as Jet. Maybe they're different dragons this time. It would explain why their Erlian looked different. But what could have sparked such a change? If Adonis had to guess, it would be the appearance and death of the dragon commander in the capital. The Alliance was still yet to face the consequences of doing such a thing, so Adonis had assumed that the dragons were unaware of such a thing happening. But now, he wasn't so sure. The effects have begun to ripple, huh? He thought to himself as he finally finished writing on all his forms. What a mess. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Chapter 432, Unexpected Welcoming. So, I'll have to return tomorrow for my test, right? Adonis was already standing to his feet after filling all his forms. He could tell that the lady in front of him was interested, but he just wasn't having it. It was better for him to spare them both the embarrassment and leave as soon as his business was concluded. No. There's no need for that. Burke answered, rising to her feet as well. Huh? Don't tell me. You must have heard, right? That an A-tier monster was captured by those two. Adonis tried to hide his surprise, but it was too much to be contained. He had indeed heard about it from the group of adventurers he spoke to the previous day, but he thought that was an exaggeration on their part. They seemed to disagree on so many details about the monster that he assumed they heard the news from someone who, perhaps, also heard it from another. It seemed like unreliable information at best. So it was true? They actually captured one. A bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. Why? Burke heard his whisper and chose to answer him, despite it merely being rhetorical. Why else? For the purposes of the next heroic rank test. Hearing that only further confused Adonis. The actions of the two didn't seem like what dragons would do. Why would they ever think of contributing to the cause? Unless. Could the monster be a trap? The only for him to find out was to actually see the thing. Lucky for him, he was going to be taking the test that day. That means I can take the test now, right? Will you take me there? Adonis asked. No. Just wait here while I call your supervisor. Somehow, Burke's tone seemed a lot more distant and cold than charming. She must have taken the hint that he simply wasn't interested. Adonis nodded and waited on his chair, wondering on a few things in his solitude. The conquest will most likely begin tomorrow evening. He began, rubbing his chin as he considered a few things. The students had to meet the guild master who requested for them before them, so Adonis planned on making it today, probably after he was done with his test. There, they would explain their plan to him and hope it coincided with the plans of the conquest that they already drafted. More likely than not, they would officially announce Lux and Jet as heroic rank adventurers before the current day ran out. If that was the case, then by passing the test, he would also join them for the announcement. That will probably be the first time we meet. As Adonis was still on this train of thought, the door behind him opened, meaning it was finally time for him to take the test. Thank you so much, Miss Bulletin. Adonis stopped mid-sentence as he turned and stared at the most unexpected sight he could imagine. Yes, Burke was the one who opened the door, and she entered the office soon after, but the people who stood at the entrance were the ones that surprised him the most. There was his test supervisor, Britta, but two others also stood there. Are they? Jet and Lux. Adonis' eyes nearly bulged as he saw them looking at him with calm demeanors on their partially covered faces. He felt a lump in his throat, and somehow his instincts warned him of danger. They here? How are they here? Why? Did they already catch a whiff of him and plan to eliminate him by using the element of surprise? Were they planning on holding Britta and Burke hostage? How much do they know about us? About the plan. As sweat began to appear on Adonis' face, he heard a voice wake him up from his dazed state. I suppose he's a bit overwhelmed, seeing his hero in person. Forgive his discourtesy. The moment Burke said this, Adonis snapped out of his shock and quickly made an attempt to improvise. I am honored to meet the strongest the city has to offer. He swiftly bowed his head, hoping that would at least hide the nervousness that pervaded his face. Oh? He's a lively one. Britta commented with a slight chuckle. That's odd. Britta was a very bitter and strict woman, according to my memory of her. She reportedly lost one of her arms in the dungeon conquest, and so she was forced to retire as a full-time adventurer as a result. She remained a supervisor, though, but she was known to have a very bad temper. Even before she lost her arm, everyone claimed that she was still very rude and mean. As such, even at this moment, she wasn't supposed to be so pleasant to be around. Seeing her laugh so wholeheartedly should have made Adonis still very rude and mean. As such, even at this moment, she wasn't supposed to be so pleasant to be around. Happy, but he couldn't help but slightly stare at the two shady characters behind her who most likely caused the change. First Burke, and now Britta. They're causing so many changes. This would only distort reality more, creating more inconsistencies. Adonis felt both worry and fear at this point, especially after a dark possibility manifested in his mind. Could it be? Do they know of my identity? If they knew that he had lived the future and was on a mission to change it, could they be trying to stop him? By creating more contradictions like this, Adonis would lose all predicting power in no time. If that's the case, then they're more dangerous than I imagined. Well, it's not every time we get to meet our heroes. Be grateful, Sabas. Adonis raised his head to see Britta smiling at him. Once they heard that their biggest fan was here to take the test after being inspired by their achievements, these two decided to watch your test with me. More sweat dripped from Adonis' face that very instant. They're trying to monitor me? Do they want to get a good grasp of how powerful I am? If that was the case, then this entire thing could be a trap. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. I hope this misunderstanding isn't too annoying for you. I personally find it ridiculously funny. Chapter 433, Non-Existent Mind Games. Why is Adonis pretending to be a fan? Was this part of the plan? Ray felt confused as he stared at the flustered expression of the hero who stiffly stood before him. He's really good at acting, though. I feel so much respect and intimidation coming from that stare of his. It was nearly convincing to Ray, in all honesty. All of this was a surprise to him. He only came to the guild with Esm since they were told to come for their official recognition ceremony. It was going to be hosted from the guild and broadcast to the entire city. Ray personally felt like all of it was unnecessary, since pretty much everyone already knew who Jet and Lux were. But he also understood how big of a deal it was for two new heroic rank adventurers to pop out of nowhere. Especially with the emergence of the Grand Calamity Dungeon. I even heard some people trying to draw connections between our arrival and the dungeon's appearance. As if that even makes sense. Their actions also made him feel ridiculous for suspecting Adrian being behind the dungeon's appearance. Paranoia was indeed a deadly thing. After studying a bit more about dungeons to refresh my memory, I no longer think he made this one appear. Ray laughed at himself. He still suspected that Adrian was lurking around somewhere, though. He just didn't know where and why. I'm flattered, but I really am not worth idolizing. Ray spoke up, gazing into the distance as if he was speaking deep words. At least, not until I fulfill my dreams. With those whispers echoing within the room, Britta and Burke both nodded with smiles on their faces. That told Ray his performance was exquisite. Your dreams. Huh. Adonis' tone was low, and his voice trembled as if he was under some kind of pressure. What is your dream, really? Yeah? Why is he asking me that? Shouldn't he already know if he claims to be a fan? Ray was at a loss for words, but he pulled himself together and strengthened his persona to the max. You already know, don't you? After a moment of silence, Adonis made a slight glare. His face seemed to echo resolve, and he nodded slowly. Yeah. I know. Ray also nodded. He still wasn't sure why Adonis decided to act like this, but he didn't plan on raining on the boys' parade. To every man his own, I guess. And as for his decision to come watch the exhibition, Ray was simply bored waiting for the guild master, so he decided to buy time by watching Adonis fight. Besides, it would raise his social points as Jet if he decided to personally witness his fans' ascent to power. Adonis will become a 6-star adventurer for sure. All of this is just ceremony. Now that he thought about it, Adonis probably wanted to latch onto the growing popularity of Jet and Lux. If that was the case, then Ray didn't want to get in the way. "I'll do my best to prop you up, don't worry." He gave an internal thumbs up. "Well, since we're all here, let's go to the test center, shall we?" Britta beamed at everyone. And so, with a nod, everyone departed. Well, everyone except Burke. Did she get promoted or something? Ray's thoughts trailed as he walked away with the rest, ignoring the wide smile she constantly gave him. Good for her, I guess. The test center sounded like a fancy name, but in actuality, the place was just an auxiliary building attached to the Adventurers Guild main building. It existed in the same compound, at the backyard. The building was separated into compartments, and it was designed like a maximum security prison. Considering the fact that dangerous monsters were kept in this place for candidates to slay, it was the least they could do. The doors, walls, ceiling, literally everything was reinforced with orichalcum, with some adamantite alloy lacing some more dangerous and important areas. The particular room where Adonis stood in was the largest of all, the only place that could possibly match the scale of the battle that was about to take place. It was coated, from all sides, with a special orichalcum adamantite alloy that made the place as sturdy as any establishment could afford to. The spectators were 3 6-star adventurers, and they stood at the farthest corner of the room as they watched Adonis prepare himself. The spectators were 3 6-star adventurers, and they stood at the farthest corner of the room as they watched Adonis. There was no safety guide or protection for them. Considering how supervisors assigned to tests that reflected their capacity, they didn't need any kind of special barrier. Not only would it add more cost to the guild's budget, but a functional safety barrier could potentially get in the way of supervisors helping out candidates whose lives were in danger. Supervisors weren't obligated to help, and the guild wasn't liable for any harm caused during the test. It said so on the form, but it was still standard ethics for supervisors to assist those who had given the test their best but were in danger. Being able to freely act, without a barrier stopping a supervisor, was far more optimal. Cheaper too. "Are you ready?" Britta's voice echoed out loud as she looked at Adonis' anxious face. Some of the flickering lights above the room added unneeded tension to the moment, creating an air of eeriness. "You can still pull out if you want to." Adonis sensed concern in Britta's voice, and he guessed she must have noticed his unease. However, the reason for his current state wasn't due to the monster that stood behind the thick door a distance from him. It was due to the two who stood next to her and watched him with dark intent. "No matter what happens, I can't give them what they want." Adonis inhaled deeply, preparing himself for the challenge. "I can't show them my full power." Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. I swear, this stuff is just hilarious to me. Chapter 434, Facing the Ceresis. I'm ready. Adonis raised the sword he had taken on his way to this room. The guild provided many items and equipment for those who desired to take tests, though using them was optional. The items were also pretty basic, so no one taking any advanced test really bothered with them. Still, with Adonis not having a sword of his own, refusing to even think of bringing out his divine sword, this was his only choice. It should do the trick, he told himself, taking a battle stance as he narrowed his gaze on the massive door before him. Once it was open, the monster would charge out. And then came the tricky part. I have to try my hardest to hold back, just enough to defeat the A-tier monster. That way they can underestimate me as much as possible. Adonis would never give them what they desired. Very well. I shall now release the A-tier monster, Britta said, reaching for a lever that was right beside her. Click. The gigantic door began to tremble, almost mechanical in a sense. And then, the ground beneath it opened. That very instant, the hinges loosened and the slab of metal that covered the entrance swiftly descended into the abyss. Before even a second passed, a massive creature charged out of the dark room where it was held and wildly made its entrance. Gruaa. The creature's body resembled a lion, albeit blackened by its dense hide. It had 3 scorpion-looking tails, and its 6 eyes were red with fury. Ceresis, huh? This is a tricky one, even among A-tier monsters. Adonis stole a glance at the dark gentleman who folded his arms and watched him keenly. His suitcase was right beside him, as was his partner, Lux. Did they pick this one intentionally? There were many questions bubbling up within Adonis' mind, but something told him that the ferocious beast he faced wouldn't give him any chance to mull over them. He strengthened his stance and looked at the creature with untainted resolve, his blade shimmering with the flickering lights. Come. Whoosh. The Ceresis charged at Adonis with primal force, but he refused to back down. Not while he had his goals to fulfill. A Ceresis is similar to the Manticore myth back on Earth, with a few adjustments. Adonis' thoughts trailed as he waited for the thing to near him. Not only was it much taller, about 4 meters, than in the myths, it had 3 tails instead of 1. The strongest ones have up to 5, but those are rare. Adonis prepared himself as he let energy surge through the rest of his body. He promised himself he would not go all out, but it was very difficult to quell his fighting spirit when a threat was right in front of him. Perhaps this was simply instinct, the result of spending years in a world filled with nothing but chaos and despair. Still, Adonis calmed himself and resolved only to use one of his powers. Boom. The ground nearly shattered as the creature sent its claws charging at Adonis, and he responded with a slash of light. The resultant force caused everything to quake, even the bodies of the spectators. However, this was simply the beginning. Whoosh. Adonis fluidly moved his body away from his position, just in time to avoid one of the Ceresis stingers. It was a close call too, or at least it appeared to be. He leapt to the side of the monster, once again avoiding the next sting attack. Increasing his pace, he twisted his body as he made to slash the Ceresis hide, but the last stinger caught his blade. Clang. Guh. The density of the stinger caused some recoil on the blade, which forced Adonis' hand back. If it wasn't for the golden light that shrouded his weapon's body, it would have definitely shattered into pieces. That was just how strong the stingers were. Boom. Once again, Adonis evaded the assault of the stingers that attempted to catch him while he was defenseless. Thankfully, the light element was pretty fast. Any other elemental attribute, and he would have had to task his body a little more. Groff. The Ceresis let out a mad cry, causing the room to be filled with an intimidating roar. This was some sort of debuff move that caused a rapid decline in its opponent's stats by inflicting the negative status condition of fear. Fortunately, this only worked on fodder, and any candidate who desired to take the test, in the first place, wasn't expected to fall under such a cheap move. Of course, that wasn't all the Ceresis had to offer. It was just a prelude to the main thing. Fluish. The mouth of the Ceresis suddenly began to suck in an absurd amount of air. It was most likely going to release one of the deadliest skills in its arsenal. Booyish. Adonis barely dodged the first blast of compressed air, causing the attack to hit a nearby wall. Boom. Despite how reinforced it was, the pressure made a small dent on its surface. If it was any other wall, the whole thing would have been blown away. One needed not imagine what would happen if such an attack had direct contact with a human. Not even their bones would remain intact. Phew. Adonis exhaled deeply, intending on increasing his pace a little more. He also planned to increase the strength behind his blow. Especially since he now had a proper understanding of how strong the thing was. Come on. Boom. Adonis raced, his body becoming a blur of golden light as he dodged the several blasts that were sent at him. His eyes glowed with incredible vigor as he leaped away from his position and charged at the Ceresis from the side. As expected, it raised one of its stingers to eliminate him. However, wrong move. Swish. Adonis became a swirling torrent as he twisted in the air, generating enough momentum to slice off the stinger. In that swift motion, he obtained his first small victory. 2 to go. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Haha. This was a pretty fun ride. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. My author notes have been sparse because I've been writing so much at once. Once things slow down, you'll see more of me.